Welcome to this tutorial on editing an audio story using Adobe Audition. My name is Regina McCombs. I teach at the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Minnesota. This is designed for my students, but hopefully other people may find it useful as well. There are a lot of tutorials out there about the Audition workspace, how you edit your audio from video, how you put together a podcast, but I couldn't find many that sort of really talked about how do you layer interviews and natural sound and what's the workflow for putting all that together. So that's what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about setting up your workspace, but really only in terms of setting it up to edit. This way, you'll need another tutorial if you haven't seen Audition before that will walk you through what all the buttons are, what your tools are, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about two different workflows for editing. Depending on sort of your background and how you've edited audio before, you may find one more useful than the other. Then we're going to talk about polishing your edit and exporting your edit. First up, let's talk about the workspace. When you open Audition, it opens up initially in this default workspace. Depending on any other tutorials you've done, you may have ended up in one of these others. We are going to, for the sake of this tutorial, switch to the simple editing workspace. It has everything we need, not a lot of extra stuff. It's just a nice, clean space to work. So the first thing we'll do when we go to put together our story, when we want to sort of look at how all this works, is we want to open our files. And really, open and import doesn't make a whole lot of difference here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up 6 files that I have. But what I want to show you is that I also have another folder tucked in here to my audio assignment 1 called Original Files. And if you look, you'll see it's all the exact same files. So I'm going to talk about the reason why I do that in just a minute, but I wanted to show you that that's sort of how I organize those things. So I'm going to open these up. You'll see one of them automatically opens up in my center waveform view, and then I have all of the others over here on my top left in a list, and I can switch between them just by double-clicking on the name of the file. And then as I use my spacebar to play and pause, I can quickly hop through and see what's on those files. The main reason we want to use the waveform view is if we need to get out clicks, bangs. For instance, if there was a bang here that I really needed to get rid of, it happens to come during the report a question, so I don't care. But if I needed to get rid of that sound, if there was a buzz that I wanted to process the audio and try and eliminate some of that buzz, I could do that. I would do that in the waveform view. If somebody's doing a lot of ums or you knows, and so many of them that you feel the need to get rid of some, you would do that here in the waveform view. Now, the tricky thing is that the waveform view is what's called destructive editing, which means any changes you make here, when you go to save the file and save your project, it will save that back on top of your original file. So if you make a mistake, and that's surprisingly easy to do when you're processing files, you end up not noticing that you made someone sound sort of digital or robotic because you overprocessed the file until you go back and listen to it later. So, and those changes are permanent because this is a destructive form of editing. So that's the reason I keep another copy of all my files sort of tucked away, and I can, if I have messed up, I can pull out that same file from the folder that I've hidden it, saved it, and kind of go back and save me from myself. That's the problem with destructive editing in the waveform view. Now, if you want to do any of that audio processing, again, there are a ton of tutorials that show you how to do that, and I'm not going to walk through that in this one. What I will show you is this handy little guy here. If you need to change the overall volume of your file, this dial lets you very quickly and easily raise your levels. I find beginners often record at too low of levels. So overall, you sort of want to be hitting that when you play it. When we watch our meter, we want to be hitting the, somewhere in the -9 to -6 range. If your levels are hitting in the 15 to 12 range, then you want to be sure that you bring them up while you're working here in the waveform view. So there's another very important view in Adobe Audition, which is the multi-track view, which is up here on our very top left next to waveform. That's, you can see that's blue. That's what we're in right now. And so we're going to click on multi-track. First thing it wants us to do is name a session. It calls your multi-track workspace a session. So I'm going to call this edit 1 because we're going to do a second version of this as well. I can browse to where I want it to go. I want to be sure that it's going in. There it is in my audio assignment 1. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to look at my sample rate, which is 44.1, which is good. That is what our files are at. And then we want the mix to be mono because, again, we've created mono files. So I'm going to click OK, and it's going to pop us into the multi-track view. So now you'll see why it's named this, right? Because there's multiple tracks. It defaults to 6 tracks. You can add, I think, up to 99 if you really want to. So it's very powerful in terms of, you know, sort of modifying this as you go. You'll see now on our top left in our files window, we have something called edit 1-1.sesx. You never want to submit this file. This is not a finished audio file. You will always need to submit something that you have exported after you have edited. So just be sure you're never, this is not a working audio file. This is just our workspace. It's sort of giving us it's sort of a database of the workspace that we're using. Anything we do here in this workspace, and the way that we work in here is we can drag things in here. I can drag each of these files individually. I can drag a bunch of them as a group. And you'll see that they all kind of show up in the workspace in fun colors. If you really want to change the colors, you can right click over here. And then using this, I can drag them around. I can shorten them. I can lengthen them back to the full length of the file. And so that is the kind of thing we can do here in the multi-track view. So now that we've got our workspace set up, we've got our files moved in, and we've created a session. Let's talk about the 2 different ways you can think about putting together your audio into a complete story. I'm going to select all of these and delete them so that we don't have anything. Let's check, make sure. This little guy is really handy, this zoom out full on all axes, to be sure that you're seeing everything that's on there. Okay, so I've made this clean again, it's empty. And I'm going to talk about the workflow that I prefer to get files together. So the way that I like to work is to work in my waveform view, finding the sections of the files that I want, and then placing those onto my multi-track view. So in this case, let's say I want to start with some natural sound. So I'm going to pick this section here. One of the advantages of this way of working is it works great if you have really good logs, if you have noted all your ins and outs and your good natural sound that you want. This is a really efficient way to work. It's also good if you have lots and lots of files, so that if you've got 10 or 15 or 20 files you're working with, this is often the sort of more efficient way to work. So I've selected this part that I want. All right, and I'm going to right click or command click or command click on a PC, or control click if you don't have your mouse set up to right click, and I'm going to insert into multi-track, and I'm going to go into edit 1-1, which is the one I created. And you will see that it drops it wherever it was that I left my playhead. And I had left the playhead up here at the beginning on track 1. One of the nice things we can do here is I can rename these tracks. So I like to put all my natural sound on one track. If I just have a short story, 1 or 2 people that we're talking with, I can put my interviews on another track. If I was doing a longer documentary, if I had multiple main characters, I might put them each on their own track. If I was going to do narration, I could label that, and I could say that I could call this music if I was going to add music, which I am not. All right, so there we go. So now I know that I want my next piece to be an interview, and I want it to show up here. So I'm going to activate this track. I'm going to leave my playhead right there. And I'm going to go back and I am going to go to my house dirty clip. And let's see where she starts.
It's really dirty and it's really sad.
All right, so I know that she's talking through here. I'm selecting that just by clicking and dragging, right-clicking, insert into multitrack, edit one. So now you'll see that it's dropped in there. I'm going to add a little more natural sound here. In fact, I think at the very beginning of this track we have some that it's a lady talking.
Why don't you just drop whatever it is with a blanket and pull it out, mister?
Now, one of the things to think about, I don't have to get really exact in terms of what I'm going to place into the multitrack because I can tweak that later very easily. So I just want to make sure I have all of it and that it's what I want. Oh, oops, I made a mistake. I forgot to move my selection of track, and so it dropped it on top of the other one. The good news is it's not fatal. So you'll see what happens is Audition assumes you wanted to do that and puts what's called a crossfade in there. And it's not the end of the world, but I actually want those to be a little snugger to each other. So all I have to do is click and drag. And so I'm going to do it, I'm just going to do it by eye for now. And later when I go to polish, I'm going to worry that it starts exactly where I want it. All right, so now I'm going to go here and I'm making sure I have my right track selected. And I'm going to go to my homeowner and I'm going to let her tell us what's going on.
I think I'm from the...
Okay, I want to see where my out point is. All right, so I want this section, right? I'm going to right click, insert into multitrack, edit 1, 1. There we go. So next, I want some more natural sound, and I'm going to pick a longer stretch of natural sound than I want to go all the way to the end. So I'm going to take just this big old chunk of banging and booming here. Right click, insert into multitrack. You're getting the idea, right? So I'm going to go here, do a quick sound bite with one of the workers.
So what's it like in there?
By the way, these files came from New Orleans at the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina when we were covering sort of the where New Orleans was in terms of the recovery. So these are actual files. All right, I'm inserting this into the multitrack. Oh, I did it again. The nice thing is the multitrack view is non-destructive, right? So nothing changes on there. I can easily pull and drag this off. It doesn't change anything that happens to the files. And that's true even after I save. So the multitrack version, the multitrack view is what we call non-destructive editing. It only sort of makes notes and it doesn't actually change the original files in any way. All right, so now I'm going to go here. I'm going to put the homeowner again, give her the last word.
I'm gonna refill, but what I'm gonna...
Again, I don't have to be really fussy about exactly what I'm putting in there because I can modify that as I go. So for instance, I can easily shorten this up if I made it too long, or in this case, I didn't make my natural sound long enough. So I can drag that out to the entire length of the original file if I want to. All right, so now you'll see, if we hit our little button here, you'll see we have a nice little story that's about 1:15 with a few interviews and some natural sound. And the next thing we would do if we were going to continue on in this way is we would polish. But instead, we're going to take a little detour here and talk about an alternate workflow. So I'm going to create a new multi-track session. And I'm going to call this Edit 1 version 2. Same file settings. So here we go. Now we have a nice clean track again. If you want to completely edit in this view, you can do that. The advantage is, right, that you don't have to be moving back and forth between the multiple views. The disadvantage, I think, is there are several. If you move all your files on here like this, you sort of lose any time codes in any notes that you've done. One way around that is to pick a time. So for instance, I would go to 2 minutes. I would drag everything to the 2-minute mark. And then you just know you have some simple math that you have to do to find your correct time code. Now, of course, if we play, everything plays at once. And so what we would need to do if we're working in this space is to solo the tracks, the particular tracks. So I'm going to solo this here. I'm pretty sure this is the spot that I want here. Now, another, I think, disadvantage of working this way is you'll see I had my move tool. Now I've got to go back up and switch to my selection tool. You can also do this with keystrokes. Adobe's really good at providing keystrokes, and you will actually see if you hover, it will tell you what the keystroke is. So I'm going to select this here. I'm going to Command C or Control C or Edit, Copy, whichever I prefer. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to paste it in, Command V, paste, just like a word processor. Again, I can name this Nat Sound Interviews. Okay, I can't hear this because this track is still soloed. So that's the other sort of big disadvantage, I think, of moving around back and forth here, is that you have to do a lot of muting and soloing, and you will end up switching between your tools. Now, here's our soundbite I want to use, and because I've done this so many times, I know it, but you would have to mute and solo to listen to it, and then we swoop back over here. Again, we paste it in here. Go up here, find my natural sound again. Let's see, I'm not positive. Oops, I didn't hit the solo. What's it? Nope, that's not what I want. Where is it? Sorry. So this is, there we go. So there's our other little stretch of natural sound we wanted. I'm copying that and pasting it back up over here. So I think you get the idea. Now, an alternative to doing it this way is to, I'm going to zoom all the way out, is instead to sort of take your files and move them one after the other. And this way you don't have to do all the muting and soloing. You can leave them, all up, and that's easier, but then you really do lose your access to your time codes and things. So if you've got 3, 4, 5, 20-minute files, it's going to be a bit of a bear if you're working off of all of one track. So if you came from working in something like Audacity, you may find this a more logical way to work. But for me, I find it clunkier and sort of more of this back and forth. This guy comes in very handy because you're swooping around and looking for your files a lot. So I won't bore you with putting everything back on the timeline, but again, you copy the sections you want and then paste them into the timeline where you want them to go. And in the end, it doesn't matter which of these two methods you use, you end up with the exact same product. So we're going to flip back to our other edit session. You can also do that by double-clicking here. And now we're going to talk about how do you polish and make this sound beautiful. Now that we have assembled all of our bits and pieces that we want to, that makes our whole story, now we want to sort of make it smooth and audible and feel really seamless. So if we play it now, for instance, we'll see that obviously the levels there are way off. The natural sound is overwhelming her voice. So we're going to sort of work on getting that all buffed up. One of the things I like to do, because I like things tidy, is to go to tracks and then delete empty tracks. So now you'll see I just have these 3 tracks or 2 tracks, and then this bottom one is called mix. And that is always there, that always will be there. And so that's not something you want to fight against. It's actually a good thing. And I'm going to make these just, oops, I always do that, a little wider. Now we can zoom in here to the beginning with either the plus key or using our little bar here. And so we're going to look at our first couple bits of sound. Now I want to start a little tighter to that sound, so I am going to slide this over and drag this back to the beginning because I want to sort of catch people's ear right away. All right, so now what I want to do is I almost always want to sort of fade clips in and fade clips out. And Adobe Audition has this nice little option. You see this little square with a triangle through it that lets you just fade in at the beginning and fade out. And the longer you drag that in, the slower your fade up will be. There are some ways to sort of change this shape if you like, but for beginners, this works great. So we always want to listen, and you will listen and listen and listen again. All right. All right, so again, I don't want somebody in the background there, so I want this to start right about that time that last one clangs. I'm going to fade her in just a little bit.
It's really dirty, and it's really sad. Trying to help as much as we can. Get it cleaned up so they can move back in, hopefully. They can't move back in until it's all gutted out.
Why don't you just drop whatever it is with a blanket?
Okay, so the timing on that is pretty good. But what I always want to aim for is that so people don't even notice sort of the transition between the natural sound and the story and the interviews and things. So in this case, I want to make sure that that hum, we can see there's a bit of a hum, right? That it doesn't pop in, that it feels like all of a sudden you just hear that it's there.
Hopefully. They can't move back in until it's all gutted out.
That was a little too much, so I'm going to fade it in even more.
They can't move back in until it's all gutted out.
Why don't you just drop whatever it is with a blanket and pull it out, mister?
All right. So there we go. And now I don't necessarily want this audio to end right away, but I also don't want it to go full volume the rest of the way. So what I want to do is sort of bring the rest of this down and then fade it out. So I can go ahead and do my fade out. And what happens, you'll see this yellow bar here on each of the files. If I click and drag it, it changes the volume of the entire clip here. It doesn't affect my original file, but this clip on the timeline, it will change the volume of that. But if I want to bring this down to change it within, I give it a click there, a solid click, and I get this little diamond shape that's called a keyframe. And that keyframe basically tells the software that I want to make a change. So this will be sort of my anchor keyframe. I'll click a second spot and I will drag that one down. And again, this will fade at whatever shape, however, it would go really fast if I put it here. It'd be an instant drop, it'd be a long, slow drop if I put it here. So I'm going to kind of go in the middle here. And then again, the only no way around it except just to keep listening.
Pull it out, mister.
I think I'm from the bottom of...
All right, so she faded out okay, but we've got the homeowner, sort of that hum back there really came in. So let's try this again.
Pull it out, mister.
I think I'm from the bottom of my heart to the top. I'm so grateful that they were able to...
So we didn't notice this disappearing. That nasty generator sound is a tough one to deal with. So we're going to live with a little bit of that sort of popping in more than we like.
I think I'm from the bottom of my heart to the top. I'm so grateful that...
Looking at my levels, they look good. Okay, so I'm going to go to the end of her soundbite. I'm going to fade her out. And I'm actually going to bring this over a good bit. And I want this to, when she's done speaking, I'm going to want that to be full. But in the meantime, I want it to fade up. And I'm going to use my fade in too. So even the low level will fade in there.
And I wish it was something I could do, but I just feel so blessed.
Ooh, that was way too abrupt, right? So I'm gonna give her a little more space by dragging that.
I feel so blessed.
And I might even slow that down a little.
I could do, but I just feel so blessed.
All right, so there we go. So that worked well. And now I'm going to keep this file running the whole time, but obviously I don't want it up full. So I'm going to fade in my next soundbite, and I am going to put a keyframe about here. Put another one here and bring it back down again. So let's see how that sounds.
It's moldy.
Oh, that felt a little abrupt, didn't it? So let's try it again.
It's moldy. It's musty. It's overwhelming when you enter.
Now you'll see if we look at our meter, the levels are a little bit high, but these bangs are really loud. So we may just live with it if it's punching it right only on the hammering. There's no sort of magic way to know if your interview levels are at the right level compared to your natural sound. There's just nothing to do but listen, and you have to decide that. So this is where a nice pair of headphones can help, really sort of hearing what the difference is between them and if it works.
Because there's everything that's in a house, everything that's in your house at home is in this house still. It's been sitting after a flood 11 months later.
All right, so that feels good to me. It's sort of like it's there in the background, but it's not overwhelming. So as he finishes up, I'm going to start to bring this up. And if I put this in the wrong place, I can always drag it to a new place. I can put this here. So let's see.
Sitting after a flood 11 months later.
So one thing to remember, this kind of polishing takes a lot of back and forth. So oftentimes you'll feel like once you've got all your pieces on your timeline, you're pretty much done. But in fact, sometimes your polishing can take nearly as long as it took you to build your story in the first place. Now she starts this with a bunch of I'm gonnas, so I'm going to try to minimize that, but we also need to bring this down.
But what I'm gonna do,
Ooh, that was good. I'm proud of myself there. See, so here she's doing a bunch of,
I'm gonna refill.
but just by fading in here to the right spot, we can really minimize that so much that you don't even notice it.
I'm gonna refill.
Oh, and I didn't get it as good this time.
I'm gonna refill, but what I'm gonna do,
I may keep this, oops. Didn't mean to move that, so there we go. Tweak this over a little bit.
I'm gonna refill, but what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna wait until hurricane season is over with. Once it starts and when it ends, and if it looks okay, if the levees here are rebuilt real good, I'll start rebuilding once they tell us it's okay. 'Cause I want to come back to my house. This is my home.
All right, so now we just want to polish this ending. We want to give that a nice fade out. I think that might be the end. No, a little bit. Let's see if we can get one good bang at the end. Ooh, good. So we're going to bring this up. Get a little bang to finish it off.
I want to come back to my house. This is my home.
All right, so there you go. So that's just a really sort of super simplified version of how to do this. So then the next thing I would do is I would play it again from the beginning, listening and watching my meters and making sure that the red light at the top is never... On a clang like that, it's okay to have it get close to 0, but if the red sort of overmodulate light comes on, I might fade this out a little, let that go out a little bit more. So there we go. So now you have essentially polished your story. So listen to it one more time, watch your meters, and you will be ready to export. So now we have gotten our level set. We think everything's about right. We've listened one more time and watched our meters, and we feel like everything's set. So as I prepare to export, I always sort of want to make sure I have zoomed out again all the way, because sometimes when you're editing, you think, oh, I'm not sure I want this soundbite. I'm going to drag it out of the way, stick it here for now, and decide if I want it later. Then you forget all about it, and so if you click this little button, this will remind you that you have a stray file sitting there. So you want to, I'm going to undo that because I want it back where it was. Now I am ready to export. And if I have used this editing technique, I am ready to go. Everything's clean. I just have my 2 tracks, and I'm going to go to File, Export, Multitrack Mixdown is what it's called. And in this case, I'm going to just multitrack mix down the entire session. So I'm clicking entire session. I can call it mixdown. You can call it master. To turn it in for an assignment, you need to make sure it's named correctly the way it's specified in the assignment. We are going to export as a WAV file. If you were going, for instance, directly to a podcast, you would export as an MP3 file, but we want the higher quality WAV file, and so we're going to export as a WAV file. Use our sample type, same as source, and we are going to export the mix as a mono. And I do want to have this open files after export checked. So I'm going to hit OK. And you will be amazed how quickly this does this. And now you will see I have my mix down, and this is my completed file. So one thing you always want to do is listen to it one more time. You may be so tired of it at this point that you can't stand it. But it's important that you listen to it one more time, because inevitably you find something that the levels, the comparative levels aren't right. Something's wrong. I've got some clangs here. I want to take a look at why they're so much louder. So there's always going to be something. So you want to listen one more time before you sort of say it's done. Now, if you have, let's go to our other multitrack. If you were working in using this technique where you've got a bunch of files still on here, if I was to go and export this now, File, Export, Multitrack Mixdown, if I do the entire session, it's going to have all my clips, and it's going to play exactly all these things as they are sound on top of each other, and I'm going to have like 10 minutes of stuff rather than just that little minute plus that I want. So if you're using something like this, or if for some reason you don't want to delete the extra stuff off your track yet, what you need to do is set an out point. So you're going to want to go to the spot where your last audio is, and you're going to hit the letter O for out. And you'll see it automatically sets the in point to be the beginning of your project. If you want to change that, you can by dragging it over. But in this case, we want to select this edited section of our track, and we are going to export multitrack mixdown, and we're going to do the time selection. So that way it will only export the sections of it that we have highlighted here, and we won't be getting all the junk that we sort of have set at the end. So there you go. Again, you always want to listen right before you export, the last thing you do before your export, and then you want to listen one more time to your completed export to make sure it's really what you thought it was. And that is how you use Adobe Audition to put together audio storytelling.